Hey everybody, this is GGB co-host Peppers, and it's time for college basketball upset of the day, Tuesday edition. I'm sorry I didn't do some one-day edition. I was too busy taking my annual sadness day when the Saints are taken out of the playoffs. But there was actually a pretty huge upset yesterday. If I'm going to be honest, it wouldn't have mattered if I made a video. Anyways, I was going to pick Florida State to upset Louisville, but since Louisville dropped out of the rankings, and again, I recorded Sunday night, it would have been really weird. And you know what, I'll just take the L for the day. But actually, the Big East win. If you did not know, St. John's upset UConn yesterday. UConn was ranked by a pretty considerable amount. It was a pretty huge upset after a pretty crazy week in the Big East already, with Creighton losing to Butler the other day. So the big question is, what impacted in the Big East? Well, since UConn lost, they dropped from they were sitting at 4-1 and in second place overall in the conference. After that, they dropped all the way to fourth place in the conference. So a pretty huge loss and a big win by St. John's. Nothing really happened too much for St. John's. They go to 3-6 with Butler ahead of them at a 3-5 record and Providence with a 3-4 record. But in Big East play, but they can rise 2 spots if they get a win their next game. So it's pretty huge for St. John's to pick up that dub, get themselves back into this Big East race. In the Big 12, Baylor played Kansas. Nothing too huge happened for Kansas after Baylor beat Texas Tech on Saturday. Texas Tech had fallen to 4, but since Baylor beat Kansas last night, Kansas fell to 4 and Texas Tech got back to 3. So nothing huge happened. A bad thing happened to Kansas that they fell 1 spot, but still not huge. There's still not a huge discrepancy in the Big 12. If we're going to talk about overall conference goodness, I mean, the 7th team in the conference, West Virginia, is only 3 games out of first place in the conference, which is absolutely insane. Pretty crazy if you want to think about it. And it's going to be interesting come playoff time because there's 8 teams that should be considered at this point. But let's go into the college basketball upsets that could possibly happen today. At 5:30, we have Purdue, which is 10-5, traveling to number 15, Ohio State, which sits at 11-3. Ohio State's favored by 4.5 points. It's on the Big Ten Network, all you need to know. Purdue forward Williams leads the Big Ten in rebounds and fouls, which is that last quarter is not a great thing to lead the Big Ten in. But the rebounds is impressive. I watched him play on Sunday when they played Penn State, and he's a very impressive player, although he does make some boneheaded mistakes sometimes, so you got to watch for that. So, and you know what I don't understand is how Purdue is not ranked in the top 25, and Illinois is. Illinois is ranked 22nd. Well, Purdue sits at a 10-5 record, Illinois sits at a 9-5, and Purdue has, I've got to say, has been pretty impressive over the past couple weeks, and I'm more impressed with what Purdue is doing right now than what Illinois is doing. Again, and that's just my personal opinion. There's a whole bunch of teams that I could see going all over the place today. But let's talk about what would happen if Ohio State won. If Ohio State wins, they move to 6-3 on the year. So 6-3, I believe they stay where they're at the 4 spot. They can't pass Wisconsin this week unless Wisconsin loses. So again, what happens if Purdue wins? Purdue goes to 6-3, moves from the 5 spot to the 4 spot, passing Ohio State. Ohio State loss would drop them to 5-4, which would drop them 2 spots behind Purdue and Illinois. So the best case scenario for Illinois is actually if Purdue wins today, because if Purdue wins today, you actually get to move up a spot without having played, which is pretty impressive. So that's what would happen if Purdue and Ohio State won. So at 6 o'clock, Maryland plays Michigan. Now, Michigan really should have this win. They had a pretty hard crash to reality when Minnesota absolutely bruised them, destroyed them. I knew that the undefeated thing wasn't going to last for long, especially in the Big Ten when literally any team can beat you except for Nebraska and Penn State. But this is a game you kind of have to win. Okay, so if we're going to talk about rankings in the Big Ten, Nebraska's probably the worst team. Penn State's probably the 2nd worst team. And then I'd say Northwestern's probably the 3rd worst team. We're talking about the 4th worst team in the Big Ten here in Maryland, right? You need to not lose this game. There are some games where you can lose. Minnesota won, especially. Minnesota's a very good team this year. You can't lose to Maryland. Maryland's a team that's on the brink of making the playoffs. They're just, they're not doing great. They're not doing great this year. They have upset Wisconsin, so you got to watch out for that. But this is kind of a game where you can't really lose if you're Michigan and really be considered top 10 material. Michigan is right now leading the Big Ten in rebounding margin at plus 8.6 per game. But if we're going to talk about the Big Ten, let's get into the big picture of things. Now, if you are an Iowa fan, and I know a lot of people are Iowa fans, a Michigan loss would be huge here for them, because Michigan and Iowa both sit at 6-1. Now, the only reason, Michigan and Iowa both sit at 6-1 in conference, right? The only reason Michigan has the overall pit is because Michigan has 11-1 record while Iowa has a 12-2 record, right? So, a loss here for Michigan would be huge. Bad thing for Michigan, great thing for Iowa. I would move to number 1 in the conference again without playing. On the other hand, what would happen for Maryland if they win? They would move to 3-5 on the year, have a 9-6 record. So, if you were wondering, that would put them ahead of teams. They would move up ahead of Michigan State, ahead of Northwestern, ahead of Rutgers, move to 3-5 in conference. So they pass all those teams. They'd be right behind Indiana in conference play, which is a pretty huge jump that you can jump from 3 spots with a win. So again, a pretty big game for Maryland. Now, again, if Maryland loses, they fall to 2-6. They stay where they're at because, thank goodness for them, Penn State and Nebraska are just so dang bad. They're not going to really catch them. So Maryland right now is sitting at bottom of the conference. They're next to Penn State and Nebraska, which you never want to be. You never want to be next to those two teams. So the real question for Maryland is, can you win? Because if you get the win, that's so huge. You can bump up 3 spots, go right behind Indiana, and suddenly you're 9th in the Big Ten, which, honestly, you're jumping from 12th to 9th is pretty huge. It's a big thing, jumping up 3 spots, especially in the Big Ten. So, huge game for Maryland. Again, if Michigan wins, they just hold on to that lead in the Big Ten. So, nothing huge is going to happen if Michigan wins, but crazy stuff can happen if Maryland loses, but Michigan really should win this basketball game. At 6 o'clock, we have number 6 Tennessee, which is sitting at 10-1 overall. Travels to Florida, which sits at 6-4, right? So, Tennessee is favored by 6.5 points in this game. It's on ESPN. Florida is right now shooting 38% from beyond the arc, and it definitely seems to have gotten over the injury earlier in the year. So, the real question is, can Tennessee handle this pretty good Florida team? Florida team's really bounced back in the past couple weeks. They had a struggle against Mississippi State, but as many of you know, in the SEC fans of basketball, Mississippi State's actually really good this year, 4th in the SEC, right? So Florida right now sits at 6th. I'm not too worried about Kentucky. If you're an SEC fan, you'll notice that Kentucky's just not playing good basketball this year. So I expect them to kind of flounder at some point. I have a losing streak at 2, while Florida lost their last game. The problem is Tennessee has won 3 straight. The last one they lost was against Alabama, who's also insanely good this year. Which is not normal for Alabama at basketball. They are a very good basketball team. It's a tough one to face. So I think Florida definitely has the shot of pulling off the upset here. They are also a very good basketball team if you look at them. So I don't know. I think this is going to arguably be a very big game in the SEC, because if Tennessee flounders, they fall to 10-2 in overall and 4-2 in conference, which would be the same conference record as Mississippi State. Doesn't really matter though, because their overall record is better in Tennessee. I don't think they've played Mississippi State yet, but if they have, they've definitely beaten them. So there's no world where Mississippi State passes Tennessee with a Florida win. But with a Florida win, Florida would actually pass Kentucky right behind Mississippi State for that 4 spot in the SEC, which is where that Mississippi State loss really kind of hurts Florida, if you're a Gators fan. But you have plenty of time to come back from that loss, and a big win against Tennessee would be huge here today. A win for Tennessee and, let's say, a loss for LSU against Alabama tonight, Tennessee would move up to that 2 spot. So, again, you're a pretty big Alabama fan tonight if you're a Tennessee fan. 6 o'clock, we have South Carolina, which sits at 3-3, traveling to number 19, Missouri. Missouri's favored by 6 points in this game. It's on the SEC Network. Right now, South Carolina leads the SEC play in rebounding with a rebounding margin of plus 11 per game, which is pretty impressive, but you also have to take into consideration that South Carolina has actually only played 2 games overall in SEC play. So honestly, a 1-1 record isn't horrible. It's like not a horrible record if we're gonna talk about it, but it's also not a great record. You know, a 2-1 would be nice to get back into this thing. And a 2-1 record, I believe, passes both Florida and Kentucky, and especially if Florida. Oh, actually, if South Carolina win, put them at 2-1, which is better than most 500 teams. So they definitely pass a team like Missouri, for instance. I think a team like Florida and probably probably just a team like Florida if the Florida loses as well. So I believe that it's possible that South Carolina hops 2 spots with a win and gets into 6th place in the SEC. Now, if Florida loses, if Florida wins, I think the best they can do is hop 1 spot past Missouri. Now, a Missouri loss would fall them 2-3. It wouldn't hurt them too bad. They just fall behind South Carolina in the SEC rankings. They'd still be ahead of teams like Arkansas, Texas A&M, Auburn, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt, right? So, the big question here is what happens if Missouri wins. A 3-2 record would launch them past Florida with a win, right? And past Kentucky. So they could conceivably get to that 4 spot, that 4 spot with a win. So, with a win and a Florida loss. So, it's definitely going to be interesting. A lot of SEC fans are going to be watching different SEC games throughout the day. At 7:30, we have Penn State, which sits at 3-5, traveling to number 22, Illinois. Now, Illinois did not have a great game against Ohio State the other day, but again, Ohio State's very good, and we already saw what Illinois was able to do to Penn State a few weeks back. Now, Penn State is not good this year. It's just not a good basketball team. But let's see what happens in both scenarios. Illinois is shooting 40.5% from behind the arc, which leads the Big Ten this year. So Illinois with a win. Illinois with a win, and so no matter who wins in the Ohio State-Purdue game, right, you're going to pass one of them. You're going to pass one of them with a win, right? A 6-3 record would mean you pass either Purdue or Ohio State, depending on who wins tonight, right? So the big question is, what happens if Illinois loses and Penn State wins? Now, there's not a huge upside to Penn State winning for Penn State fans. 1-4 in conference record that you're still behind Maryland and Michigan State in Northwest. You're still 1 game behind Michigan State Northwestern. Not Maryland and Michigan State, for instance. So, but it's 1 step in the right direction. After 4-game losing streak, you kind of need this one. So, I don't know. Penn State kind of needs the win here. Illinois desperately needs that win after Ohio State game, so it's going to be interesting. Remember, if Illinois wins, regardless of it, you're passing a team. You're passing Ohio State or Purdue, regardless of who you would rather pass. Doesn't matter. One team's still going to be ahead of you. There's no chance you pass Ohio State and Purdue today, but you're at least going to pass a team with a win. So, at 8 o'clock, we have number 18, Alabama, 11-3, traveling to LSU at 10-2. Now, LSU guard Thomas leads the SEC in free throws with 77, points with 265, and free throw percentage with 89.5. Now, the SEC is very top-heavy this year. There's some very good teams up at the top, teams like Alabama, LSU, Tennessee. And then there's some mediocre teams, like I'd say Mississippi State, Florida, Missouri. I'm putting Missouri in that category because I don't really love the out-of-conference play has been pretty good for Missouri, but the in-conference play has been pretty not great, if I'm going to be honest. They have not played SEC opponents very well. So, Missouri is really in that Tier 2 category for me. So, I think there's a possibility the SEC gets 6 teams in, right? So, the big question is, what you going to do? So, LSU, with a win, would move to 6-1 on the year and would be able to pass Alabama for that 1 seed in the SEC, right? So, it's a pretty big game for LSU. Again, if Alabama wins, they just hold on to the 1 seed. Nothing too crazy happens there. But with an LSU loss, they fall to 5-2. Tennessee has the chance to pass them tonight. And Mississippi State might have the chance to pass them tonight. Let me see. No, they don't. They can't pass them tonight. But the worst LSU can fall to 3 in the SEC. So not a huge. There's a pretty big upside with a win against Alabama. Moving to 1st in the SEC is pretty important. But falling to 3 is also not horrible, especially considering you're very much still in the running. And then finally, we have the Big East. In 8 o'clock, we have Seton Hall, which is sitting at 9-5, traveling to number 3 Villanova, which is at 8-1, right? Villanova right now is favored by 9.5 points on FS1, so there's a reason why. Villanova's been playing some great basketball this year. It's number 1 in the conference for a reason, and again, I'd say this again. Again, if Villanova wins, they sit at 4-0 in conference, 9-1 overall record. They stay in the 1 seed. So the big thing, it would be crazy if Seton Hall wins. Now, again, Villanova would not fall anything because they're 3-0 in conference. So actually, they might. A 3-1 record is also not great. That puts you at a 75% win percentage, while other teams have better than that, right? So, I think you'd fall right behind Connecticut, UConn. So if you're a Creighton fan, you're really hoping for a Seton Hall upset. Actually, it doesn't matter for you, but it would be nice. If Seton Hall upsets Villanova, I believe, I'm not positive about this, I believe from what I'm looking at, Seton Hall would become number 1 in the Big East, which would be crazy because they have a 10-5 record, and Villanova would have an 8-2 record. Creighton would have a 10-3 record. Connecticut has a 7-2 record, and Xavier has a 10-2 record. There's a lot of teams with a better overall record than them, but Seton Hall right now is pretty dominant in conference play. So a 7-2 record would put them first in the conference, I believe. I believe Villanova would fall all the way down to 3rd, which isn't horrible for Villanova, but falling from 1st to 3rd would be pretty huge. So, again, and then if Villanova was to win, Seton Hall was to lose, they'd fall to 6-3. I don't believe that would have a huge impact on anything. Really, they have the same win percentage, I believe, as UConn. So again, not a huge deal. They would still stay in 3rd place, I believe. So Seton Hall really has everything to gain with a win and nothing to lose with a loss, which is always the most dangerous team to bet. So what is GGB's upset of the day? Now there are some interesting ones in here. Florida over Tennessee would be interesting to see, as well as an LSU over Alabama. But personally, I'm going to go with Purdue over Ohio State. While I've loved what Ohio State has put together this year, I'm very impressed with what this Purdue squad has put together. The Boilermakers have been phenomenal this year in basketball. I really like what they're doing with that team. Matt Painter's doing an excellent job. But, hey everybody, this is GGB Carlos Pepper saying adios amigos and go Boilermakers.